Step 1, can you put your name on the front of it, please? The front of it is not the peer questions, but the other side. So not the peer questions, but the other side. That piece of paper should stick it out the door today. It needs to have scribble that is legible on every section of it. So the aim of the exercise is for you to take notes that suit you. So as we work our way through the paper, comments will be made about each of the 4 questions. Only take notes that are appropriate for your response. So at the end of it, you end up with a personalised set of feedback if you want. What we'll also do is record the whole session and then post it for you tomorrow so that, and I'll discuss the results in a moment generally, but so that we can then refine our overall results. I've asked once for laptops to be under chairs. I mean it, under chairs. It's too tempting if it's on the table. Pens down for me, and we'll start with prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Today is one of those ribbon days, and we seem to have lots of them in Australia. Those days where people wear a particular ribbon for a particular cause. Now, generally speaking, I don't subscribe much to them. Obviously, they've got good causes, but buying a ribbon doesn't do much for me. There's probably 2 exceptions. One of them is legacy badges, which are usually available for Remembrance Day and Anzac Day. And the reason I focus on those ones is because looking after those people who served for our benefit is significant. The other one that I particularly have an interest in is White Ribbon Day, which is today. And White Ribbon's all about men standing up and saying it's not okay for verbal or physical violence against women. And maybe it was part of Australian culture in the past, but it shouldn't be. And I think that you and I have a responsibility not only to not do it, but also to stand up when you see it happen. And I think that's the harder of the 2 elements. It's pretty easy for blokes to walk around and say, I don't hit women. It's much harder for blokes to say, don't hit women, to someone who does. Don't treat them in disrespectful ways. I think that's the real challenge of White Ribbon Day. In Australia, 1 woman is killed every week by a current or former partner. 1 in 3 women of your age or older report physical or sexual violence at some time in their life. 1 in 3. So if in your household there happens to be a mother and 2 daughters, statistically 1 of the 3 of them. Domestic and family violence is the major cause of homelessness for women and their children, and it's a recognised form of child abuse. When men are abusive to their partners, it's recognised as abuse for the children in the household as well. The White Ribbon Day slogan, if you like, is this commitment. And it's built up because blokes supposedly swear. And this is their claim, that I swear never to commit, to excuse or remain silent about violence against women. I thought apt then that we might just pause and think about our own personalities, those times when we get a little bit, violence not the right word, but maybe tense. We maybe lose control a little bit ourselves. And I thought one of my favourite hymns,
blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of death. just in turn are women too. Blessed they with peaceful spirits, blessed they with gentle hearts.
Gentle woman, quiet light, morning star, so strong and bright. Gentle mother, peaceful dove, teach us wisdom, teach us love.
And we ask this prayer through Christ our Lord. St. Patrick. In the name of the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit. So this afternoon is really an opportunity to do three things. And this sort of cycle that's on the screen, we've done it right throughout the prelim course. We'll continue it through the HSC course. The aim of these assessment tasks is not just to get ranks. It's not just to get marks. They're meant to be learning experiences. And in some cases, that's probably a really good thing. The learning from today is arguably more important than doing the test itself. So by the time you walk out the door with that ticket, I want every one of those questions full in terms of your comments, and I want the back completed. I'll give you time to do both. To give you a bit of perspective then, longitudinally, over 2013, 14, and you guys are 2015. The same task, different questions. And we don't just pull out the same exam and reproduce it each year. We adjust and modify, but keep the same level of difficulty. Give you some idea of where you guys are at by comparison to the previous Year 12 cohorts. So an average of 62 compared to last year's 71, it's a pretty significant difference. What's more concerning for me is the bottom two numbers, the maximum and the minimum. So the highest mark that anyone got was 95%, and I've turned it all into percentages to make life easier for you to calculate. So highest mark was 95, so 19 out of 20, but the lowest mark was 3. And there was more than one person that scored in the 3s, 4s and 5s. For the HSC, we're looking for an average of 75% across the state, so we've got a fair bit of climbing to do. Give you an idea, the 1 unit guys, I want you to think about the target you established in February this year. That's how we fell. So band 6, there was 3 blokes who got a band 6. The issue, of course, is the band 1s. Those blokes who got 9 marks or less out of 20. 8 of them. Now, if we're talking about a cohort working together, there's a real responsibility, not only for the blokes at the bottom to perform, but for the guys higher up in the system to support those guys and bring them along. That's the difference between a really solid set of HSC results and a pretty average set. I wonder, in terms of preparation, how many blokes who got 9 or less sat down with the bloke who got more than 10 prior to the exam and practiced some responses. I know that I got a few emails from individuals and they sent me sample responses and I gave them feedback, and those blokes generally scored in the 16 plus range. Miss Smith, you're in the same sort of boat? Got a couple of emails, but certainly not one from everyone. That's the expectation for the next 12 months. For every assessment task, you need to be submitting practice work. 2 unit guys, just to put you in perspective, that's how you fell out. Only 1 student. 1 student met their prelim target. There were no band 6s. Whole lot of band 5s, but no band 6s in the 2 unit guys. 1 bloke in the cohort met his target. I guess my point's this: you're not yet performing. It's not the capacity's not there, but my issue is those 2 blue columns in the 1 unit and the 2 unit. When you look at those 2 blue columns, there's a bunch of blokes who are not stepping up yet. And I don't care if it's a 1 unit course or a 2 unit course. Particularly for the guys in 1 unit, rhetorical question, did you invest as much time studying for this assessment task as you would have done for a 2-unit course, maybe Harvard. So if you had a 2-unit maths exam, did you spend half that amount of time studying for this exam? Have you got study notes equivalent to your other courses? Have you actually invested the effort and time? And I suspect that for those blokes in the blue column, that's not yet the case. General feedback then, before Miss and Miss talk to individual questions. These were the 4 things that came to me as I read each of the papers. If you're looking to take notes, it'll sit toward the top of your document. We all know explain means cause and effect. That's easy to say, harder to do. The challenge in the examiner is to work out, is the question giving you a cause and they're asking for the effect, or are they asking you to do both, or are they giving you the effect and asking you to explore the cause? So you've really got to read the question and work out what's the examiner looking for when they use the word explain. The challenge of actually answering the question is always there. And how many times have you had over, the last 11, 12 years of schooling, an exam come back and say, you didn't answer the question? So you've got to be very clear about that, and we'll give you some techniques on how to do that. To get 5 marks, and for any question in this course worth 5 marks or more, we need to see a plan. It need not be an extensive thing, but it's got to be a couple of dot points at the top of the page. And there's a few sample scripts scanned into this PowerPoint for you to look at, and you'll see those blokes who scored 5 marks had a plan. They had a couple of dot points that they just wrote at the top of the page in the margins for their own planning. You need to include evidence. Now, for the HSC exams, I'm expecting that to be quotes, or at least some sort of reference to external material. 5 marks, you need supporting evidence. And if there is stimulus in the question, you need to reference it. You don't need to rewrite the stimulus, but you need to make some sort of reference to it. That's why it's a stimulus response. If you don't do that, you're excluding yourself from those top bands straight away. The third point in there is probably the hardest to get your head around. And I want to give you a really clear example of what I mean by being explicit. Let's say that the question in maths was, what's 2 plus 2? Here's a sample answer. Well, it's a number that's even. It's located somewhere on the numbers scale. It's further right of 1, but it's not beyond 5 and it's not 2. That's the correct answer. But gee, it's a convoluted way to get there. It would have been a whole lot easier to write 4. You don't do that sort of wordy stuff in maths. Don't do it here. Answer the question, get to your point. Don't make the marker search for the answer. And that seems to be a bit of an issue with some people. And I know that Ms Jansen was marking geography for the last few weeks at the HSC, and one of the challenges she faced was searching for the answer. Make it easy for the marker to give you the marks you deserve, answer the question, and be blunt about it. Don't make it flowery, it's not creative writing. Get to the point, because you've only got a limited space for the 5 markers particularly. So what we'll do is walk through each of the 4 questions. What I'm asking you to do on the sheet of paper is take note as to what applies to your answer. So open up to the first question that you've answered, and Miss.
So I'll speak to those together, and then Mrs Jantz will speak to questions 2 to 3. It makes sense that I mark question 1 and question 4 because both of them had Aboriginal content or Indigenous Australian content, which is why I marked both of those. Question 1 has a stimulus quote, and as Mr Matheson just said, it is essential that you reference that stimulus quote somewhere to get the 5 marks. It does not mean you have to write 5 marks about the Tent Embassy protest, but you must refer to it. It must be in your answer somewhere. And surprisingly, and if you scan through your response right now, you may be one of the students guilty of it, surprisingly there are quite a few out there who responded to this question without actually referring to the Tent Embassy. Not only is there a stimulus quote, but there is a stimulus photograph. So to ignore that is to really undermine your chances of getting band 6. So the question, using your own knowledge and with reference to the statement above, explain the importance of the land rights movement for the Aboriginal people in relation to their spirituality. I've taken the liberty of preparing a 2-page document for you, which may negate some of the note-taking you're about to do, but I'd still like you to take some dot points out of this and put it on the sheet that Sir has given you as your own scaffold. It's always handy to see it in your own writing. So let me step you through my feedback around this question. I'll beam up the sample response. I don't know if you can read all of that from where you are, but you can certainly see my comments down the bottom. Excellent content and cause and effect language. Good examples given. There's one squiggly line underneath, which you've become familiar with all of our marking styles, I think, by now, and you'll understand that what I'm saying is that is unclear. Perhaps it's lacking some clarity or coherence. And maybe you need to reword that to work on your expression. But overall, this particular response, and you know who you are, fills the lines, refers to the stimulus, answers the question, makes the links that are asked of you in the question. Now, what are your jobs? I have structured my feedback around what are your jobs. And you know what? You've got to do them really quickly. Question 11, 5 marks. You've got to pump this out really quickly so that you can get to section 2 and section 3 on the day. So this is not something you're going to be labouring for 25 minutes on. This is a 5-minute response or a 10-minute response. 5 marks. You need to know your stuff in order to be able to pump that out very, very quickly. So what are your jobs? Your job is to unpack the question. You will hear things over and over again for the next year. It won't hurt you. It will only serve to make the point that if you're not planning your response, you're not unpacking the question, you're not circling instructions, you're not underlining key terms, you may not get 5 from 5. Your next job is to make a link. It's an explain question. You are to use cause and effect language to make a link between land rights and spirituality. Your job, next job, provide key and solid examples. You know you can't do that if you haven't revised. You cannot fudge that. A question about land rights movements, you've got to go in with key claims, key decisions, protests, and you must be able to distinguish between them. Your job is to refer, as we've said, to the stimulus at least once, if only once. It's a 5 marker. If you mention the 10 embassy protest amongst your examples of protest under the broad umbrella of the land rights movement, done it. Move on to the others. Your job is not to get trapped, and some people did here. This is not a question about the dreaming exclusively, although of course you will mention it in connection with spirituality, but it is not 5 marks, write down everything you know about the dreaming. And some of you did that. And look, it's better than writing nothing. You'll probably bag 1 or 2, maybe 1 mark, because there is a connection there with spirituality, but it is not a question exclusively about the dreaming, so don't fall into that trap. Consider everything I've just said your do list, your job list, things to do, things to look out for. And now here are the don'ts. And this is why you might be looking at 1, 2, 3 or 4 out of 5. This question is exclusively and specifically about the land rights movement. Don't keep saying land rights movement in this kind of sweeping fashion that you think is going to cover you for every example. You must distinguish between an act, between a decision, a High Court ruling, a protest. These are your core examples. If you went into that paper on that day and you did not have up your sleeve a couple of dot point examples of native title claims of important High Court rulings, then you were going in unrevised. You cannot just keep rehashing this land rights movement to broadly refer to victories. You must distinguish between an act, between a decision, a High Court ruling, a protest, and have key examples. So have a look at your response. Do you have key examples? Or are you one of the students I'm referring to who just kept saying land rights movement, some knowing grins? Don't write in the past tense. This is an ongoing process. Likewise for question 4. We're not talking about reconciliation as it happened last year, done and dusted, finished, let's move on. It is ongoing. It's present tense, it's future tense, It is certainly not past tense. You can talk about things like it holds significance, not it held significance. It's current, it's ongoing. So just be careful of your use of tense. That's something I would write down because a lot of students were guilty of that. I've now written in bold on my feedback sheet, have a look at your response. There's one on the board, an exemplar, 5 out of 5. I have given you a first sentence. It's not the be-all end-all. It's not the only way to begin your response. But if I was the student, I look at all of my jobs and I think, okay, they want me to make a link between land rights and spirituality. Let's make a start. Let's unpack those key terms before I get to my examples. So it might read something like, the land rights movement is both a political and religious movement that seeks to secure inherent land rights for Aboriginal people in order to preserve their cultural integrity, since their relationship with the land determines all other relationships and is at the very heart of the dreaming. So in that one sentence, that one opening sentence, you acknowledge the question, you acknowledge the key terms, and you've made a link between the two. In one sentence, you probably got 1 to 2 marks. And then your job is to provide the examples to support that link. Stimulus is there. There's one, tent embassy. Have you used cause and effect language to explain? Have you mentioned the following as possible examples? So in addition to the stimulus, which is the 1972 tent embassy, have a look at your response. These are just a few that I would mention. Did you talk about the 1963 Yirrkala Bark petition from the people in Gove, where they wrote their petition on the back of a piece of bark? 1963. I'm not sure I would necessarily talk about the freedom rides in this, 1965 freedom rides. Yes, that's about ending discrimination, and in that, if you make that link, I suppose it's a tenuous link, but it's not exclusively about land rights. I would also, as a must, have in my response the Mabo High Court ruling of 1992, surprisingly absent from many responses. Mabo, 1992, the High Court ruling that, of course, overturned the fictional notion of terra nullius. So basically what that was doing was saying that there was a native title claim from 1788 and that concept was overturned in the highest court of the land in 1992, which, you know, subsequent to that, we start to see acts like the Native Title Act. I would also include WIC, 1996 WIC decision. See the terminology, WIC decision, Mabo case, Yirrkala petition, tent embassy protest. You don't just keep calling them the movement, be specific about your examples. The last thing I would mention is the Native Title Amendment Act, which was subsequently amended in 2007 and 2009, which is evidence of it being an ongoing process. Now, if you pack all that in with some beautiful linking language, you cannot be faulted. That would be flawless, 5 from 5. At the bottom of the sheet, in bold, I've written a little note to you. Yes, you need to do all of this for 5 marks, and in order to do that, you have to know your stuff. And if you did get less than 5 out of 5 on this, your homework is to go away and redo that. Use the sheet that I've just given to you, use your notes from your textbook, and try to hand that to your teacher, I think, by next lesson, and see if you can get that 5. Don't ignore it, because this is very likely a question you'll get in a year's time. It's a very real chance you'll get a land rights question. All right, moving on. Question number 4.
Okay, so can I just draw your attention to question 2, please? Question 2. And look at that, it's another explain type question. So again, we're using the same language. We're using cause and effective language. Now, out of the 2 questions that I marked, this one was answered the most poorly. Now, if you have a look at the question, we're looking at explain the importance of religious dialogue in multi-faith Australia. What 2 areas are we talking about when we're looking at religious dialogue? What's the first one? What is it, Nicholas? Yes. What is the second one? Okay, interfaith dialogue, not multi-faith dialogue, because that was one of the recurring errors that I was finding in some of these responses. So, if you only spoke about interfaith dialogue, which the majority of you did, the most that you could possibly get was a 3. So if you answered that beautifully, gave great examples, the most that you could have got was a 3 because you did not mention any ecumenical movements. Okay? What I try to explain to my students in my class is look at the question and then put it into your own words. Okay? So what is this question ultimately asking us? We're looking at the importance of ecumenical movements and interfaith dialogue on Multi-Faith Australia. So that's basically how you needed to answer. There's lots of notes for boys that didn't get full marks on your for this question, and one of the most recurring themes as well was just no examples. You're telling me all these wonderful things that are occurring in Australia, like Christians and Muslims are speaking to each other, so we're creating harmony that way. How do you know that? What's the procedure that's gone in place? What's the community? Where's that dialogue occurring? What issues are they addressing? Why are they important? Same with ecumenical. Okay, you give me all these wonderful, great, overarching statements, but there's no solid evidence or no solid examples supporting what the question is asking you. Another thing, this question is worth 5 marks. Boys that did receive 5 marks were probably deserving 10 out of 5. Writing too much, okay? Mr. Matheson said at the beginning, just be specific, get straight to the point. It's worth 5 marks. Don't spend 20 minutes answering a 5 marker. It shouldn't take you that long. Get straight to the point. The lines there are a guide for what you should be writing. I was reading papers where all the writing's down here, going across the side as well. It's worth 5 marks. Like, don't spend all that time. If you can't get straight to the point straight away, spend that time planning your answer so you know exactly what you need to include in your response. Again...
Were you talking about writing the margins?
Oh yeah, boys are just writing too much. Well yeah, with the new marking, everything's being scanned, so if you're writing in the margins, it's not going to be seen. So stick to whatever the page has, whatever the border is in there, do not write outside the borders. Okay, because it won't be seen in the HSC paper. Just the other points, revise the syllabus because again, lots of boys left out the ecumenical part. Things that were done well were the cause and the effective language as a result. You know, this led to, thus creating. Again, supported with solid, relevant examples in Australia. Don't talk about what's happening in America, because it tells you Multi-Faith Australia in the question. Okay, don't care what's happening around the world, just what's happening in Australia. So again, for example, like the Council for Christian and Jewish Relationships seeks to promote understanding, eliminating stereotypes, promoting social justice. It's the language, it's what it's led to, and it's supporting what you have said with a solid example. Things that we need to improve on. So again, it's going back to that syllabus, knowing that ecumenical was part of this question. Too much information on the effects of Australia without supporting it with relevant or solid examples. So again, all these just wonderful, nice statements without anything backing it up. Lack of examples, too general, and the terminology. Get with the jargon. Know that it's interfaith or ecumenical. Know how to spell ecumenical. Okay, nothing shows the marker that you understand, that you know what you're talking about if you know how to spell those keywords. Okay. All right. Next question. Question 3. So this one was the only different one because it was a discuss question. Okay, so remember, discuss is, what are we doing? For and against, good. Points for and against. That's what we're looking at here. So we're discussing the factors affecting the changing religious landscape in Australia since 1945. Now again, like I mentioned earlier, only write 5 marks worth. This question, because you have such a vast knowledge of what makes up the religious landscape of Australia, writing was all over the page. Don't waste the time. So again, for those boys that were getting 5, some of the good responses kept it straight to the those line, that limit. other boys that did get 5 were writing a bit too much. Your response was probably worth a 10 out of 5. Okay, so just be succinct, get straight to the limit. What are the factors that we are talking about when we're looking at religious landscape? What factors would we be discussing here? So immigration, the no religion, denominational switching, secularism, New Age religion. Now for 5 marks, you don't need to write about every single one of them, but it does says factors, so you need to talk about 2 at least. And if you are talking about factors, you need to support your information with relevant evidence. And what evidence would we be using? Where are we getting the evidence from? Census data, okay? Census data would be the main one. The church survey would be another one if you're looking at denominational switching. So again, things that were done well. You mentioned at least 2 factors supported by statistics. Okay? It doesn't have to be the most accurate statistics, but you know when it's wrong. You can't tell me Christianity increased by 80% because it didn't. Okay? You can tell me that, it stayed relatively the same, or that Catholicism stayed relatively the same, however there was a decline in Anglicanism. Okay? You can't make up stats that are going to try and support your answer. They need to be relatively correct.
You're better off being generally statement than providing made-up data.
Absolutely. Again, those boys that got the five marks used the correct terminology. So they didn't tell me that, people travelling from overseas and living in Australia brought different religions with them. What are we talking about there? We're talking about immigration. Use the key words. So for example, immigration led to an increase in different non-Christian religions, making up 20% of the population according to the 2011 census. Okay? So again, you're supporting your point, your factor. Another one, so secularism impacts on religious landscape. So in 1976, 8.3%. So no religion compared to 2011, 22.3%. Things like that. Things that we need to improve on, using data or using evidence supporting your information. Again, there was a lot of general information talking about the changing landscape, but there was no support, no factors to help cement your information. So an example, immigration has led to different faiths, therefore led to religious landscape. What does that mean? We don't know, okay, because you're not providing that much information in there. So again, keep it concise and succinct, and just get straight to the point. You don't need an introduction and a conclusion in a 5 marker, okay? Save that for the essay.
Stand up, stretch. 30 seconds.
Good to go? Okay, I'll try and keep question 4 briefer, keeping in mind Miss has still got to do 2 questions of her own. Question 4 is on the board. Shh. Explain. Another explain. You should be getting very good at these. You should know straight away that your job then is to make a link and to use appropriate linking language, cause and effect language. Something like, this led to, as a result of, subsequent to this, in effect, which leading to, consequently. All right, you know the drill. Explain, finding a link. So the link here is easy. The cause are the actions, or the cause is the action of a religious group or a religious tradition, and the effect is reconciliation between Indigenous and white Australia. Okay, so your job, as we've said, is to find the link between that cause and that effect. You unpack this question in the same way that I've advised you to do for question number 1. I'll say it because 3 or 4 people did it. This question is obviously about, and you need to have some sense of context and exam savviness about you to know that this is of course talking about Indigenous reconciliation, not the Catholic rite of reconciliation, and I did get a few. Look, exams can do some funny things to you, but we are talking about Indigenous reconciliation with white Australia, okay? Again, you need to ensure you go in armed with examples, some real examples. Many of you clutched at straws with parliamentary or secular initiatives. Now, the question is asking about religious traditions and their role in the process of reconciliation. A parliamentary or a secular initiative is fine if it has been endorsed publicly by a religious leader, or if a religious group has issued a statement of support. And I know many of you linked the walk with the fact that it was supported by many world faiths, and you can make it work like that. It's a tenuous link. There are better examples than to go with a parliamentary or a secular one, specifically because the question's asking you for the actions of a religious tradition.
So this is not great if we're talking about the bridge walk, for instance. We say Judaism was a supporter of a bridge walk because of the Jews who walked across it. That's not quite enough of a link from you.
Not quite enough of a link. What you could say in place of that is that Rabbi Raymond Appel supported that with a statement to the effect of, and away you go with a quote. That is evidence of the involvement of a religious group. Just to say that all religious groups did it without any real backing is tenuous. Okay, and there are better examples, as I said, than parliamentary or secular examples, and that's actually not what the question's asking anyway. Look, it was done a little more poorly than question 1, calling for serious revision of this content. It's page 219 to 222 in the book, and you could have got 5 just by reading those 2 to 3 pages. There are some really good quotes in there from Rabbi Appel and from Christian group leaders, church leaders. It only asks for 2. It does say at least 2, but if you get 2 and you make really good use of those 2 examples and you make the link, then you should get yourself 5 marks. Some examples from me, just quickly, down the bottom of the page. You see from Christianity, I chose to do Christianity and Judaism, but I've just passed around a handout, a little resource pack. This comes from the Reconciliation, the official Reconciliation site. It's the section that deals with world faiths and their endorsement of reconciliation initiatives. So take this with you, highlight it, pull out some content, pull out some key examples, and use that when you go away and you redo this question, which you'll do tonight as well if you didn't get 5 out of 5. So inject some real content into your response. The other thing, look, I haven't made it pretty, I just printed it straight from the website. I haven't done a single cut and paste on it, but it is straight from the the Jewish Board of Deputies, and it's their statement on reconciliation from 2008. Some great content there. Those 2 sheets alone should get you 5 marks. The content in your textbook should get you 5 marks, and you'll never again get 2 out of 5 or 3 out of 5 for this question again. In bold down the bottom you see my examples. The fact that subsequent to that federal government's Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation in 91, over 20 Christian group church leaders declared a resolution to commit to reconciliation at St Mary's Cathedral in 1997. That's the New South Wales Ecumenical Council Act, just by the way, cutting in a bit on Mrs. Next question. But it's a classic, it's a great example for church groups, Christian church groups, and working to reconcile with Indigenous Australia. Another example, and some of you mentioned it, the fact that different Christian groups, particularly Protestant churches, incorporate Aboriginal ministries and elements of Aboriginal ritual and cultural practice into their service. And the quote in the book is something along the lines of, it's not enough just to hang an Aboriginal flag in a church and say to Aboriginal adherents, please feel welcome. And they go a further step by basically incorporating Aboriginal ministries and elements of their ritual and culture and practice into the actual church service. That's an example of working towards reconciliation within Christianity. And I've already mentioned the Judaism example. There's the quote there from Rabbi Raymond Appel, and the fact that Jewish people, as do all major world faiths, take part in the National Week of Prayer for Reconciliation, the first one being in 1993. So there's content there. Use the sheet, use my feedback sheet, and use page 219 to 221 to redo that, please, to get yourself a really good exemplar for that question, because it's another classic HSC style question 11. Any questions? I haven't left Miss much time, sorry Miss.
I'm going to pause, share, stretch. All right, grab a seat. 2 things left to do, just over 5 minutes to do them. On the back of the sheet that I've been asking you to fill in, there are a series of questions, the same one on the screen. Rhetorical questions to start with. Am I happy with the mark that I got? Rhetorical questions. Am I happy with the mark that I got? Put a yes or a no. Some of them are short questions, some of them are extended response. The second question, which follows it pretty logically. The second question, which follows it pretty logically, is did I do the work to deserve the mark that I got? So if you got a 3, did you do work that deserved a 3? If you got a 16 or an 18 or a 19, you must have put the work in to get it. I'm asking you how closely the mark and the workload you put in align. Think back to the day of the exam. What in this exam paper surprised you? Was there anything there that caught you off guard? Was the way the question was phrased or the content it was searching for or the way the question was asked, was it a surprise? The last 2 questions are the big ones. What's the learning from this task? And what's the single piece of content that I need to work on most? So everyone will have an answer to both questions. For some people, there'll be lots of content you've got to work on, but what's the piece of content that you've got to work on most? Short response to each of those. All right, pens down, eyes up. Pens down, eyes up. So far, I think everyone has something to do between now and next period. So the instruction was given, if you didn't get 5 marks in a question, use the resources from today to redo it. Do it in a Google Doc, share it with your teacher, share it with your mates. The second thing that I want everyone to do, and the URL's at the bottom of that page, is the unit evaluation. So that by the time you walk in next period, I want you to tell Miss and myself, what do we need to do better in terms of helping you get the content and the expression on the piece of paper. So 2 jobs before next period. Redo every question you didn't get 5 for and complete the unit evaluation. Questions? Your ticket out the door is that sheet